My childhood didn't fade away gradually. It was extinguished in a single suffocating heartbeat at 9 years old. It wasn't ended by a screaming match or a slammed door, but by a deafening silence. My mother, Marie Stone, didn't storm out in a rage. She simply packed. I can still hear the rasp of the zipper on her suitcase, a sound like a knife tearing through the air of our hallway. She had been a ghost for months, haunting the corners of her own home, but that evening, she decided to cross over into a different life completely. Dad told me later she found a man with a future. But the unspoken truth, the one that settled in the cold space she left behind, was that we were the baggage she was discarding. She didn't glance back. She vanished across state lines, leaving us with a mortgage that was drowning us, and a silence that screamed in my ears. My father, David, tried to shovel work into that void. Her eyes weren't looking at me with maternal love. They were scanning the room like an appraiser at a foreclosure sale. I could see her mind calculating the retail value of the floor to ceiling windows, the 60-inch OLED television, the artwork on the walls. "You have done very well," she said, her tone dripping with a poisonous mix of pride and envy. I told Caleb, "Your sister is a genius. She made it big." Caleb collapsed onto my pristine sofa, kicking his sneakers' muddy soles, and all up onto my glass coffee table. "Nice place," he deadpanned, looking around with a sneer. "Kind of small, though, for someone making bank like you. Thought you would have a penthouse or something." Feet off the table. I snapped, my voice sharper and louder than I intended. Caleb rolled his eyes, but slowly, dramatically lowered his heavy shoes. "Chill. It is just glass." Marie sat down next to him, patting his knee in a gesture of exaggerated comfort. "Now, Julia, don't be harsh. He is tired. We have had such a long drive." She leaned forward, her expression shifting seamlessly into a mask of tragic vulnerability. "We needed to see you. It has been so hard, honey. Life hasn't been kind to us the way it has to you." I crossed my arms, leaning back against the kitchen island to keep a physical barrier between us. "You haven't called in 20 years, Marie. You sent generic cards. Why are you here?" "I wanted to reconnect," she protested, clutching her chest as if wounded. "But, well, there is something else. A mother worries you know Caleb. He is bright. So bright. Just like you. He got into college." "That is great," I said, my voice flat. "It is," she nodded fervently. "But the tuition it is $60,000, Julia. And with the rent and books." She paused, letting the silence stretch, waiting for me to fill it with generosity. When I didn't, her gaze sharpened into something steely. "We need help. Just a little support to get him started. Maybe $3,000 a month, and the tuition, of course. We are family. Family helps family." The air was sucked out of the room. $60,000 up front, $3,000 a month. It wasn't a request for help. It was an invoice. "You want me to pay for his college?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous low. "Where were you when I was scrubbing toilets to pay for my textbooks? Where was family then?" Marie's face hardened instantly. The mask of the grieving mother slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "That was different. You were always strong, Julia. You didn't need me. Caleb, he is sensitive. He needs a leg up. And look at this place." She gestured wildly around the room. "You have so much. You are drowning in it. Are you really going to hoard it all while your brother suffers?" "It's so nice," Caleb snorted, finally looking at me with full arrogant attention. "You could do better than this dump if you weren't so stingy, probably. Mom said you were loaded." The entitlement was so palpable, it felt like a physical blow to the chest. This wasn't a reunion. It was a shakedown. My sanctuary had been breached by two strangers who felt they held the deed to my success simply because we shared DNA. "I think you should leave," I said, walking to the door and holding it wide open. Marie stood up, smoothing her skirt, her smile returning, but now tight and predatory. We will go. For now. You need time to process. It is a shock, I know. But think about it, Julia. Don't turn your back on your own blood. She breezed past me, leaving the scent of stale smoke trailing in the air. Caleb followed deliberately, bumping my shoulder as he passed, muttering, "Unbelievable." I slammed the door behind them, throwing the deadbolt the chain and the latch with trembling hands. I looked back at my living room, my safe space, and it felt tainted. They hadn't just come for money. They had come to collect a debt I didn't owe. And looking at the hunger in Marie's eyes, I knew, with terrified certainty, that they weren't going to take no for an answer. The next morning, the vibration of my phone against the nightstand felt less like a notification and more like a warning shot. The text from Marie was brief and calculated. "Let's talk. Neutral ground. The roasted bean on 4th. 10 a.m., please." Against the chorus of alarm bells ringing in my mind, I agreed. I told myself I was going for closure, but the fractured child inside me was still desperate for a logic that could explain the abandonment. I needed to know the why. The roasted bean was a pressure cooker of noise filled with the aggressive hiss of espresso machines and the chatter of freelancers. It was a sea of normalcy, and in the back corner, the anomalies waited. Marie sat there in a soft pastel blouse perfectly cast in the role of the grieving, misunderstood mother. Beside her, Caleb was slumped in his chair, tapping furiously at a game on his phone, radiating the energy of a teenager being held against his will. I sat down, keeping my sunglasses on for a few seconds, too long, a small, dark shield against them. "I have 20 minutes, I stated, cutting through the pleasantries like a blade. Marie's hand shot across the table, her skin dry and papery, grasping for mine with desperate intensity. I recoiled, wrapping my hands around my scalding black coffee, instead to anchor myself. "Julia," she began, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial, trembling whisper. "I know yesterday was intense, but you have to understand the context. You have to understand the history of why I left. You left because you found a better future," I said, quoting the words Dad had repeated to me like a eulogy. Marie's face crumpled, a masterclass in weaponized sorrow. "Is that what David told you? Oh, Julia, he always was a liar." The accusation hit me like a splash of ice water. "Do not talk about him." "I have to," she hissed, leaning in until I could smell the stale smoke on her breath. Her eyes were wide and wet with unshed tears. "I didn't want to leave you. He forced me out. He told me I was unfit, that he would ruin me if I tried to fight for custody. He blocked my calls, he burned my letters. I spent nights screaming into my pillow, agonizing over you. He stole you from me, Julia." For a sickening moment, the room spun. It was a monstrous inverted lie. Memories flashed through my mind, Dad sitting by the phone waiting, Dad handing me the mail the second it arrived, praying for a check or a note from her. I remembered his silence, his heartbreak, never his malice. "You are lying," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Dad never blocked you. He begged you to visit." Marie's mask didn't slip. She doubled down. "He brainwashed you. That is what narcissists do. And now look at you. You have overcome his damage. You are successful. You are powerful." She signaled Caleb with a sharp hidden nudge under the table. He looked up, his eyes heavy with boredom. "Right," Caleb said, scrolling his phone without skipping a beat. "Look, the point is you made it. We didn't. Mom said you are pulling in like, what, 6 figures mid-6? "Caleb," Marie chided gently, but she didn't silence him. "I am just saying," he continued, finally locking his cold assessing gaze onto mine. "I am starting fresh. I need the right tools. The tuition is one thing, but I can't show up on campus looking like a scrub. It is about networking, right? Perception." He slid his phone across the Formica table with the confidence of a gambler revealing a winning hand. It was open to a dealership listing, a vintage Mustang, $35,000. "I need a ride," he said casually, as if asking for salt. "And my phone is trash. The camera is cracked. I need the new Pro Max. It is for school." Content creation. My jaw tightened until my teeth ached. You want a vintage Mustang? For content creation? It is a vibe, Caleb shrugged. And frankly, you owe us. Mom went through hell because of your dad. You got the stability. You got the good life. I got the struggle. It is time to balance the books. The audacity was breathtaking. They weren't asking for help. They were demanding reparations for a war they had started. Balance the books, I repeated, my voice rising. Heads at nearby tables turned to watch the drama unfold. I didn't care. I worked 3 jobs while you were struggling in whatever life she chose for you. I ate ramen for 4 years. Dad worked until his hands bled. I stood up my chair, scraping violently against the floor. I am not a bank, Marie, and I am certainly not an ATM for your spoiled son. As the transformation in Marie was instant, the weeping mother vanished, replaced by something ugly and sharp. Her face twisted into a snarl. You selfish little brat! She spat loud enough to silence the cafe. I gave you life, I carried you, and this is how you repay me, by hoarding your money like a dragon while your brother rots. I didn't ask you to carry me. I shot back, shaking with a rage I had bottled up for 2 decades. And I certainly didn't ask you to leave. You are just like him, Caleb sneered, laughing darkly. Dad was right. You think you are better than everyone. The cafe was deadly silent now. The espresso machine had hissed to a halt. Every eye was fixed on the woman in the business suit standing over the 2 grifters. You're done, I said, grabbing my purse. Do not come to my apartment. Do not call me. If you do, I will call the police. Marie grabbed my wrist as I turned to flee. Her nails dug into my skin, leaving crescent moon indentations. He ran a diner, a true greasy spoon that smelled of scorched coffee and stale fryer oil. A stench that seeped into his pores no matter how raw he scrubbed his skin. From 5 a.m. until midnight, he was a machine flipping pancakes for long-haul truckers and pouring endless cups of coffee for the sleepless. I would watch him count the register at night, his posture broken, his hands mapped with burns and scars. Some nights, after 16 hours on his feet, he would bring home barely $40. I watched the red ink of unpaid notices bleed across the kitchen counter, screaming danger. At 13, I buried the child I was and became his partner in survival. While my classmates fretted over prom dates, I was babysitting neighbors' children until 2 in the morning, studying by the weak beam of a flashlight to keep the room dark. I stocked shelves at the corner store until my fingers were numb from the freezer's bite. You will regret this, Julia. You do not turn your back on family. We know where you live. We know what you have. I ripped my arm free. I don't have a family. I have a father, and you are not him. I walked out into the suffocating humidity of the Orlando heat, my heart hammering, a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. I felt lighter, but the fear was heavy. Marie's final threat wasn't a desperate plea. It was a promise. We know what you have. They weren't going to disappear. They were coming for it. Concentration was impossible. The cursor on my screen pulsed with a steady, mocking rhythm. Line 405, syntax error. I had been paralyzed by that single line of code for an hour, my mind trapped in a loop of the cafe confrontation, the echo of her threat. We know what you have drowned out everything else. At 2:30 p.m., the intercom buzzer sliced through the silence of my apartment like a scream. I checked the video monitor. It was them. Again. They stood in the lobby, staring dead into the lens. Marie looked shattered, mascara smeared down her cheeks, leaning heavily against the wall as if gravity was winning. Caleb paced behind her like a caged animal. Every instinct screamed at me to ignore them. I knew better. But seeing my mother look so broken triggered a reflex of pity. I thought I had strangled years ago. I unlocked the door, planning to block them at the threshold and send them away. But the second the elevator doors slid open, the atmosphere shifted. The tears vanished. Marie wasn't crying. She was vibrating with adrenaline. She shoved past me before I could utter a word, her movement fluid and aggressive. "We need to use the bathroom," she muttered, brushing against my shoulder. "Just give us a minute, please." It was a tactical strike. Marie commandeered the kitchen, demanding water, wailing about her blood sugar generating a whirlwind of noise. I felt faint. "Julia..." "The heat. I just need a glass of water. Is that too much to ask?" She dropped her purse on purpose. Lipstick receipts and a lighter scattered across the floor. She shrieked, scrambling to retrieve them. I knelt to help, my attention hijacked by her frantic energy. "I'm sorry," she babbled. I'm sorry I yelled. I am just desperate." It was a performance, and I realized it had a heartbeat too late. The rest of the apartment was deadly silent. Where was Caleb? My head snapped up. He wasn't by the door. He was at my desk. He was seated in my ergonomic chair, his face bathed in the cool glow of my dual monitors. His fingers danced across my keyboard. "Hey!" I screamed, scrambling to my feet. "Get away from there." Caleb didn't flinch. He didn't even look guilty. He looked annoyed that I had interrupted his heist. I lunged across the room, gripping the back of the chair and spinning him around. He swatted my hand away with a sneer. "Chill, I am just looking." I looked at the screen and my blood turned to ice. He hadn't just been browsing. He had Google Chrome open. My LastPass vault was triggered. He was on my banking portal and the forgot password prompt was active. "You are trying to reset my passwords." I gasped. The air punched out of my lungs. "You are trying to break into my accounts. You have the money sitting there," Caleb shouted, leaping up. In the small office, his size was suddenly imposing. "We saw the balance. We saw the statements." My mind raced. Saw the statements. I never printed statements. My security was impenetrable. I shoved Caleb aside and stared at the browser history he had carelessly left open. There was a Gmail tab active, but it wasn't mine. It was Dad's. I clicked it. The inbox was a graveyard of forwarded messages. Subject forward, Julia Foster, employment verification. Subject forward, tax documents. They hadn't guessed. They had hacked my father. The realization hit me harder than a fist. David, the man who barely knew how to operate a smartphone, who trusted everyone, had been their backdoor. They had exploited his trust, cracked his weak password, and monitored my financial growth through his inbox for months. They had been watching me, calculating my net worth, waiting for the harvest. I spun around to face Marie. The tears were gone. She stood in the hallway clutching her purse, her eyes hard and devoid of warmth. "You hacked Dad," I whispered, the horror hardening into razor-sharp rage. "You used his email to spy on me." Marie didn't bother to deny it. She straightened her spine. "Your father is a fool, Julia. He leaves everything open. I had to know. I had to know if he was lying about how poor you were." "He's not a fool," I screamed. "He's a good man. And you are a criminal." "We are your family," Marie shrieked, her voice cracking under the strain. "That money belongs to us. You owe us for the years we suffered. I owe you nothing." I snatched my phone and held it up, my thumb hovering over the emergency dialer. "Get out, right now, or I'm pressing this button. I will have you arrested for trespassing, cyberstalking, and fraud. Try me." Caleb stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "You wouldn't." I locked eyes with him, channeling every ounce of the girl who walked through blizzards to deliver newspapers, the woman who clawed her way up the corporate ladder. "I will ruin you," I said, my voice deadly calm. "I have the logs. I have the IP addresses. I will send you to jail before you ever touch a dime of my money." The silence stretched thin and brittle. Marie saw the absolute resolve in my eyes. She realized the game was lost. "Let's go," she hissed at Caleb, grabbing his arm. "She is crazy. She is just like him." They stormed out, Caleb kicking the door frame as he passed. I slammed the door behind them, throwing the lock and the bolt before leaning my back against the wood. I slid down to the floor, my phone still clutched in my hand, my heart beating so violently it hurt. I was safe, but the victory tasted like ash. They had turned my sanctuary into a crime scene, and now I had to make the call I dreaded most. I had to tell Dad. The silence they left behind was heavy, vibrating with the ghostly echoes of their shouting. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I dialed the one number I knew by heart. Julia. His voice was thick with sleep. It was late in Ohio. Is everything okay? I couldn't sugarcoat it. I couldn't lie. I poured it all out, the ambush, the extortion, and the email account. I heard his breath catch on the other end of the line, a sharp intake of pain. She hacked me, he whispered. It wasn't rage in his voice. It was a profound, crushing disappointment. She has been reading your emails, Dad, for months. That is how she tracked my promotion. That is how she hunted me down. The silence stretched, and then he exhaled a sigh that sounded like 20 years of defeat leaving his body. That is Marie, he said softly. She always found a way to steal what she didn't earn. I am so sorry, Jules. I opened the door for her. No, I said, my voice hardening into steel. You trusted people. She weaponized your kindness, but we are bolting the doors now. Forever. By the next morning, the tears had dried into armor. I wasn't a victim. I was a project manager handling a crisis. I hired Mark Sullivan, a litigator, with a reputation for being a shark in a cheap suit. I sat in his office, spreading out the screenshots, the browser logs, and the venomous texts Marie had sent overnight. Mark didn't flinch. This is harassment, cyberstalking, and attempted grand larceny. We are not just getting a restraining order, Julia. We are building a fortress. The legal machinery was cold, sterile, and deeply satisfying. We filed an emergency injunction. The judge, staring at the evidence of their digital break-in, granted a permanent restraining order against both Marie and Caleb. If they came within 500 feet of me or sent a single digital ping, they would go to jail. But a court order is just paper, and paper doesn't stop a predator immediately. 3 days after the filing, my phone screamed at 3 a.m. Alert: unauthorized transfer attempt detected. Amount $10,000. Destination Grant Educational Fund. My heart stopped, then hammered against my ribs with a fierce rhythm. It was their final, desperate lunge. They had used the account numbers Caleb must have memorized or photographed during those chaotic seconds at my desk. But then the second notification arrived. Action Block 2-factor authentication failed. Account frozen. I stared at the screen in the dark. The code, the paranoia. The walls I had built around my life. It had worked. They had tried to rob me while I slept, and the system I built had strangled the attempt. I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt a cold, grim satisfaction. I forwarded the alert to Mark. Add this to the file I typed. The fallout rippled outward swiftly. Word traveled through the estranged branches of our family tree. My Aunt Ruth Marie's older sister, whom I hadn't spoken to in years, called me. She has always been a grifter, honey, Ruth said, her voice heavy with regret. We cut her off years ago. I am sorry you had to learn the hard way. It was the validation I had been starving for. The defect wasn't in me. It wasn't that I was unlovable or unworthy. It was that I was the daughter of a woman who viewed people as wallets. I started sessions with Dr. Brooks, a therapist specializing in family trauma. She helped me dismantle the guilt, that survivor's guilt, of escaping poverty while my blood relatives claimed to struggle. You didn't leave them behind, Julia, she told me. I delivered newspapers before the sun dared to rise, pedaling through the gray Ohio mist, fighting a war against exhaustion. Every crumpled dollar bill I scraped together went into a jar on the fridge. Dad tried to push it back, his pride wounded, pleading, Julia, go be a kid. But I knew the math. The water was rising, and I refused to let us sink. Yet the poverty wasn't the weapon that hurt the most. It was the mail. Once a year, with cruel precision, a card would arrive. No return address, just a postmark from a stranger's city. Inside, Marie's handwriting was razor sharp and elegant. "Happy birthday, hope you are well." That was all. No, I miss you. No, I love you. Just a cold, contractual obligation on stiff cardstock. Those cards were surgical strikes. They were proof she was out there building a new life, raising a new son, my half-brother Caleb, while I was on my knees scrubbing floors just to keep the electricity on. You saved yourself. There is a massive difference. A year has burned away since that knock at the door. My apartment feels different now. It is no longer just a sterile bunker designed to keep the world out. Tonight the air is thick with the scent of garlic and roasted rosemary. The table is set. Dad is here, visiting for the week. His laugh booming at a joke my friend Kara just told. Nina is pouring wine, and Ryan is plating the food. These people, my friends, my father, they do not want my money. They do not calculate my net worth. They show up when I am broke, when I am weeping, and when I am victorious. I look at Dad, his face fuller now, the stress lines erased since I helped him retire from the diner. He catches my eye and winks. I realize something during this war with my past. Blood is just biology. It is a biological accident. But family is a choice. It is the people who stand guard at your door, not the ones trying to batter it down. If you are listening to this and you feel guilty for cutting off toxic family, for choosing your sanity over their demands, stop. You are allowed to build your own peace. You are allowed to lock the door. My name is Julia Foster. I built this life, and nobody gets to take it from me. I would stare at her script and feel a crater open in my chest. Why wasn't I enough? Dad was my anchor, holding me together with weary smiles and help with calculus, but Marie was the phantom limb that never stopped aching. I took that agony and distilled it into high-octane fuel. I realized early on that tears would not pay the rent, but numbers might. Data never left you. Data never lied to you. I buried myself in mathematics, finding sanctuary in equations that always promised a solution. My guidance counselor saw the feral desperation in my eyes, the absolute hunger, and pointed me towards scholarships. When the acceptance letter for a full ride to the State University for Data Analytics arrived, I didn't cheer. I exhaled. It was my escape hatch. But a scholarship only covers tuition. The rest, rent, food, books, was a weight on my shoulders alone. College blurred into a haze of caffeine and code. I waited tables at a campus dive bar dodging drunk patrons while reciting Python scripts in my mind. I cleaned law offices in the dead of night, wiping down the mahogany desks of men who made more in a single hour than I made in a month. For 4 years, I slept 4 hours a night. I became a machine driven by a singular, terrifying thought: I will never be poor again. I will never be left behind again. Graduation wasn't a ceremony to me. It was the finish line of a marathon. I landed a junior analyst role in Orlando, Florida. The humidity hit me like a physical wall, but it tasted like freedom. I climbed the corporate ladder with the same ferocity I had used to scrub those floors. Junior analyst, senior analyst, team lead. Within 5 years, I was staring at a bank account balance that looked like a telephone number compared to the scraps Dad used to bring home. I bought a sleek apartment in downtown Orlando, glass walls, modern art, a view of the skyline. It was the anti-diner. It was sterile, pristine, and safe. I never forgot David. The moment I found stability, I became his safety net. I sent checks $500 at first, then more. I paid for the new roof. I bought him a new fridge. I fixed his car. Every check was a silent thank you for the pancakes, for the late nights, for staying when she left. He would call me, his voice cracking with pride, telling me I was his greatest achievement. I thought I had won the war. I thought I had built a fortress high enough that the shadows of the past couldn't scale the walls. I had the career, the money, the apartment. I had scrubbed away the stain of poverty. But I was wrong. You can change your zip code, but you cannot change your blood. And one autumn evening, the past didn't just catch up to me, it knocked on my front door. Tuesday evenings were my sanctuary, a silence I paid a premium to possess. 20 stories above the street, the city was nothing more than a rhythmic, distant hum against the glass. I sat on my sofa, a glass of Merlot in my hand, finally exhaling after a grueling 10-hour marathon of SQL queries and client demands. My apartment was designed as a fortress, cool grays, sharp modern lines, every object curated and controlled. It was the architectural opposite of the chaotic, desperate life I had escaped. Then the silence shattered. It wasn't the polite knock of a neighbor or the buzz of a delivery driver. It was 3 strikes against the wood. Sharp, rhythmic, demanding. Bang, bang, bang. Paranoia spiked in my chest. I checked the time. 8:45 p.m. I wasn't expecting a soul. I walked to the door and peered through the peephole, and the breath trapped in my throat turned to ice. The fisheye lens distorted the image, but I knew that face instantly. Time had etched deeper lines around her eyes, and her hair was dyed a harsh brassy blonde, but it was her, Marie. And standing in her shadow was a slouching figure of a young man, his face illuminated by the ghostly blue light of a smartphone. My heart hammered a frantic warning against my ribs. Do not open it. But curiosity is a dangerous, compelling thing. I threw the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Julia? The act began the moment the latch clicked. Marie's expression shifted instantly from impatient agitation to a radiant theatrical joy. She lunged at me, enveloping me in a suffocating cloud of cheap, floral perfume and stale cigarette smoke. Her arms clamped around me, not like a hug, but like a trap snapping shut. "My sweet girl," she crooned, her voice trembling with a vibrato that felt entirely rehearsed. "It has been too long. Look at you. Just look at you." I stood rigid, my arms pinned to my sides, refusing to participate in the embrace. Over her shoulder, I locked eyes with the boy, my half-brother Caleb. He looked about 19, draped in designer streetwear that looked suspiciously fresh. He didn't smile. He barely acknowledged my existence, chewing gum with his mouth open, staring past me into the apartment with bored entitlement. "Mom." I managed to say the word tasting like ash on my tongue. I pulled away physically. "What are you doing here? How did you even find me?" "Oh, hush," she dismissed, waving a manicured hand as she stepped past me, invading my living room without waiting for an invitation. "We have so much to catch up on. Caleb, say hello to your sister." Caleb grunted a low "Sup," and followed her inside. The invasion was immediate and total. They didn't just enter my home, they occupied it. Marie drifted through the living room, running her fingers along the back of my Italian leather sofa, touching the marble coaster on the coffee table.